Victor Agreda is the editor-in-chief of TUAW.com, TechCrunch sister publication in the AOL empire, a website, of course, that specializes in Apple. So I thought we have had about 8 days since the bomb exploded with Steve Jobs' resignation. And I wanted to catch up with Victor and get a sense of where we're at and where we're going. So Victor, welcome to TechCrunch TV.
Thank you.
Victor, 8 days have elapsed since the nuclear explosion of Steve Jobs' resignation. What happened over those last 8 days?
What's been interesting has been to see an outpouring of reaction from people who actually knew Steve in a multitude of different scenarios. Just today, we saw something about one of the principals at the design firm that helped design the Apple logo, and his experiences. We've heard people who lived just in his neighborhood. I thought that was a particularly compelling story because we don't very often hear about the human side of Steve because we're very focused on the products that he's helped bring to light at Apple. But there's also been a lot of talk about how is Apple going to continue without really the chief visionary of the company, both from its inception and from its rise back. And even while he was gone creating Next, he was still creating parts of what would become Apple property because OS X is largely based on Next. So I think that we've sort of come to a point where people have settled on the fact that Tim Cook is going to operate the company and has been already operating the company very much as Steve would have the company operate. And there's been a lot of talk about the human capital that Apple has invested in over the years, and there's still a strong management team there. So it's been interesting to see sort of how things have shuffled, and we just saw today, of course, that Eddie Q has been promoted to the software side of things beyond iTunes, but actually encompassing all of their software and web. So, I think we've seen things shake out in the most logical fashion possible.
Are you surprised with the outpouring of love for Steve Jobs when, after all, even his biggest admirers might acknowledge that he's probably not the most lovable of characters?
I think that's probably Steve's gift, other than being a visionary. I mean, he's certainly wired in a way that allows him to sort of see potentialities beyond what most folks are seeing. That's his purpose as a visionary, is to see beyond, oh, well, this is a tablet device or whatever. What is it really more than just a piece of glass and some chips and whatnot? The other thing about it is that he is very, very demanding. And that is going to make some enemies. And it's going to also make a lot of friends because he sticks up for what he believes is the right way to go forward. He, created the 99-cent music download is because he insisted that there be a single price for music on the iTunes store when it launched. And that was a huge thing. But if he hadn't insisted, if he could have walked away and said, you know what, forget it, we're not going to do this now, you guys aren't ready. So I think that to see people coming out and saying, thank you for this or thank you for that, I think it's just a reflection of the fact that Apple has created a lot of great things that have helped a lot of people. We've done a lot of stories on TUAW about assistive software that's available on the iPad, for instance, that's actually helping people in a medical capacity. And, you can't discount that. Even if the guy can be abrasive in person. I mean, I have friends who have, I have a friend in particular who it was somewhat famous when she went up to Steve Jobs to just say hello, and she was rebuffed. And, but that's just the way he is. I mean, he's a private person in many regards. And I don't think that the adulation is diminished by the fact that on one-on-one, sometimes he can be abrasive.
Do you think that the success of Apple, though, reflects the fact that the most effective way to run a technology company is in an authoritarian manner, instilling fear in its employees?
Well, you know, I know a few Apple employees. They're not necessarily fearful all the time, but
Only
I
when
think
they're at work, right?
yeah, well, you know, I mean, I think it's perfectly understandable to have a reasonable fear of people stealing secrets, and you find this. My father's in the chemical business, and you know, I remember as a child, he went and took pictures of GlaxoSmithKline when we were in London, and a security guard came out and said, "I need to know why you're taking these pictures of this place." And he wasn't conducting corporate espionage, at least as far as I know. But the idea is that every company has company secrets, and we just tend to think of Apple as being incredibly secretive. There are actually plenty of other businesses that are also secretive, to the level of paranoia as well. But I don't think that makes it a bad place to work. The people that I've spoken to who work at Apple really love it.
What about Tim Cook? Can he maintain the Jobs mystique, or will the reign of Cook degenerate into the normalization of Apple, just another company?
Well, that's really the $1 million question. I mean, the question
Or
is,
it's actually a billion or several $billion
that's
question.
a very good point. Yeah, you know, there's no question that Tim is going to toe the line, and he's also as adamant about user experience and as adamant about the things that we talk about being in Apple's DNA as Steve is. And that's the reason that he is CEO right now, is because he is going to draw those lines in the sand, and he's going to say, no, we're not going to compromise on these things. Now, the other aspect of this is, of course, Steve's particular vision. But I think it bears mentioning that Steve was not necessarily a huge fan of the iPod when it was first spoken of inside Apple. When the idea was initially pitched to him, he was not necessarily a huge fan of this. So not everything that Apple has done has been Steve's idea. So it's important to understand that he is not the wellspring of all ideas at Apple. He's also not the guy who goes through and makes sure that everybody's doing their work. There are a whole level of systems and balances and whatnot within Apple to make sure that they're staying on the same course. And I think that if there's anything that he's done in the past 10 years, it has been make sure that we have these processes in place. And I think the App Store approval process is probably a good example of showing how they start off and it's not a great implementation, but they refine that process over time. And once they get it down, it's like, when's the last time you heard a complaint about an App Store rejection?
Well, Victor, very briefly, final question. Do you think that Cook will be a successful CEO?
I do, and for two reasons. One of which is simply the fact that he is tough in a different way that Steve is tough. But the other thing is that Apple also has a product lineup for the next 5 years that is going to be just as strong as what they've got now. So it would be really, really difficult for him to screw up Apple at this point.